He is, without much debate, one of the greatest political athletes of all time. He was able to convince a wide swath of the American public, including some people who might have formerly voted Democrat, that he would be a vessel for their frustrations, that when people came after him, they were going after them. People identified with him. They identified with him in a way that they don't typically identify with politicians.
Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us is Alex Isenstadt. Now, Alex and I go back a long ways, okay? I don't know if you remember this, but we go back to the Mitt Romney campaign, which is the 2012 campaign. So that's 2011, my friend. So 14 years. He is a senior political writer at Axios. He's a best-selling author. And the title of the book is Revenge, the inside story of Trump's return to power. It's great to have you on. But before we get into the book, tell us a little bit about Alex Isenstadt. What are you? Who are you? Where'd you come from? Where were you raised? You know, give me some good bio gossipy stuff about Alex.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Anthony, and congratulations on all your success with the podcast and everything else you do. Grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Went to a small school in the mainline suburbs of Philadelphia. Joined Politico in late 2008, and I was there for 16 years. Covered all kinds of political things. Started covering Trump in 2015 and did it all the way through nonstop ever since. Joined Axios in late January of this year, so I'm new there. And I started working on this book in February of 2023, right after Trump kicked off his comeback campaign. And I spent 2 years writing it, and it came out on Tuesday of this week, Tuesday the 18th.
All right, it's incredibly well sourced. Okay, it's because when I read the book, I'm like, okay, he definitely said that, and I read Trump definitely said that because what Trump does is he repeats himself a lot, and so he is saying shit today that he said in 2015 and 2016. As I was on the plane, so I know he said this stuff, and so you don't have to give me your sources, of course. I would never ask you that, but tell us a little bit about your sourcing. People come to you, right? They tell you,
yeah.
It's almost like they want journalists like you to know the hysteria and the mania that's going on. So why is that? Without, of course, giving up any names.
Yeah.
Tell me why that is.
No, so this is an important question, and I'm glad you're asking it. So when I started writing this book, what I found was that I went to a bunch of people who are in Trump world and close to him, people who are very much involved in the campaign, members of Congress, donors, advisors, allies, the like. I went to a wide spectrum of people, and I told them I was writing this book. I wanted to embark on this project of covering this campaign, and I wanted them to essentially use me as their journal, where I would talk to them daily, where they would tell me what was going on, their impressions, what they saw day to day. And what I found was that people were very willing to talk. They were very open about talking. And I think everyone knew that this was going to be an interesting race. I don't think anyone knew exactly what the twists and turns would be, but I think everyone knew it was going to be very dramatic. And what I found was that people wanted to tell their story about what happened. And I think people knew that history would be made, and they saw this as something that they wanted to be involved in, and they wanted to participate in helping out a journalistic project. And I told them, look, I'm trying to be fair. I'm not trying to write a pro-Trump book or an anti-Trump book. I'm just trying to tell the story behind the scenes of what happened and let readers feel like they're a fly on the wall and they're there in the room as these historical events are happening.
Well, okay. Well, you did an amazing job of that, but I had a couple of reactions to this book. So
sure.
One of the reactions is that the conventional wisdom is often, if not always, but often wrong about Trump. I would say 90% of the time it's wrong. So 𝗕cie𝗁𝗵𝗆, Trump is dead. McCarthy thought that. McConnell thought that. Pundits thought that. Okay, he's done. He's a insurrectionist traitor to the United States. Trump doesn't think he's done. Trump's raising hundreds of millions of dollars off of the quote unquote election lie. So tell us about the mindset of the people around Donald Trump. Did they think he was dead in 2021? I mean, again, politically dead, because I want to be very specific here. God forbid. And then the question is, how did his resurrection evolve? Tell us about his confidence level over the last couple of years. Where was it at different points?
I think that one cannot overstate the degree to which Trump was left for dead after January 6th, and including some people who are very close to him. So let's go back to January of 2021. Trump comes back to Mar-a-Lago. He has no political operation to speak of. He is suspicious of the people who work for him. He suspects that they stole money from him. Now, to be clear, Trump is always suspecting that people are stealing money from him and taking advantage of him. But he decides to get rid of his political operation, or at least what is left of it. You go back to this time, and a lot of his old New York friends, the people who came up with him in business, they've decided to leave him. He isn't getting his calls returned anymore. People don't want to have it. He's disregarded in a lot of respects until he calls up Susie Wiles and says, I want you to figure out what's going on in my political operation. I want you to help me. And they didn't even have at Mar-a-Lago at that time. Trump didn't even have his private Wi-Fi at that point. He had nothing. So Susie Wiles drives to and from her home in Jacksonville to brief Trump, and she builds a political operation from scratch, in part because he didn't have anything, in part because a lot of people who worked for him left him for dead. And then in terms of his overall mindset, Trump has very much sharply divided the American public. There are people who love him and there are people who hate him. I don't think there's a whole lot in between there. And what one can conclude from this race, and this is one of the overall conclusions from this book, is that he is, without much debate, one of the greatest political athletes of all time. He was able to convince a wide swath of the American public, including some people who might have formerly voted Democrat, that he would be a vessel for their frustrations, that when people came after him, they were going after them. And people identified with him, and they identified with him in a way that they don't typically identify with politicians. One important point to make after January 6th is he, thanks to his marketing power, was able to almost turn that into a plus for himself, in that he was able to convince people that it was simply the result of the Justice Department coming after him. And if you look at that, he's still pushing that message. When he goes to the DOJ and he launches this purge of the DOJ and the FBI, getting rid of anyone who was involved in any tangential way to the investigation related to January 6th, he has completely rewritten the narrative to cast himself as a victim. And to some extent, it's worked.
So when do things start to get better for him? He's on trial, and they're going to convict him of being a felon. He's got 34 felony counts. Is that a low for him? Is that weirdly contrarian, galvanizing support for him? Tell us when things really started to seismically change.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, this guy's mounting a very big political comeback.
So here's a really important point in the book. Let's go back to very, very early 2023, right? In late 2022, the Republican Party has a very disappointing midterm election. Trump gets a lot of blame for that, right? Because of the candidates that he endorsed, many of whom went on to lose in the general election, right? A couple weeks after that, you have this famous or infamous dinner that Trump has with the rapper Ye and Nick Fuentes, both of whom are avowed anti-Semites, right? In Fuentes' case, a Holocaust denier. You have a couple weeks after that, Trump puts out a Truth Social, essentially calling for the abolishment of the Constitution. You have a couple weeks after that, Trump decides to put out NFT baseball cards of himself, right? And even within Trump's inner circle at that point, there was a widespread belief that Trump might be heading off the rails, that he questions about how serious he really was about this comeback campaign, and that maybe it's over before it started. You go back you then fast forward a few weeks later, And there is a train derailment in Ohio. And Trump decides to go down there. He goes down there with J.D. Vance, who helps to organize that trip. He goes to a McDonald's, does some photo ops, and all of a sudden you have the narrative set for this campaign. You talk to everyone and they'll tell you that visit to East Palestine, Ohio was a turning point in this campaign because it gave Trump the message that he was looking for, which is that he could identify with blue collar people who feel like the federal government hasn't done enough for them. And if you look at what those people were saying on that trip, they were telling him that the federal government and the Biden administration wasn't doing enough to help them following this train derailment. And if you look at that visit, his visit to McDonald's, that was something, those retail stops, that person-to-person retail that he really hadn't done at all before in his political career, right? Like, this guy is a germaphobe. And the fact that he would show up at McDonald's, that he would talk to potential supporters, that became something he did throughout the campaign up until the very end, where he literally did a photo op where he literally was working at a McDonald's. So that East Palestine visit was a huge turning point for him.
Yeah, I guess, and that probably also was a precursor to Vance becoming the vice president and so forth. But
Sure.
I guess where I'm trying to be as objective as possible, because I've had my ups and downs with Donald Trump, and obviously I think he's a danger to our society. I've been pretty open to that, but there's something going on in the society right now, and I'm going to say it. I want you to react to it. I think he's the greatest culture warrior of our time. I think there is a culture war going on in the country: pronoun usage, woke, DEI. The buckle of the Bible Belt doesn't like non-traditional America in their minds. And I think Donald Trump has assaulted the people. He's triggered the liberals, and he's got them with their hair on fire on most cable channels. Yep. And the right is dominating the media now. Take a look. They say the left is the left-wing media, the left is dominating, but the right really has a stronghold on ratings, whether it's Joe Rogan, radio, podcasting, Fox News. And so respond to that. Is he a formidable culture warrior? And is culture going to be a 26 issue for the midterms and another 28 issue? And what does that say about the Democrats? What are they missing here? First of all, am I right? Yes or no? And
on the culture war
thing,
what
does it say about the Democrats?
Oh, I think without question, you're right about the culture war. He has found cultural issues that deeply split the American society and that in many cases are winning political issues, right? They made the Trump campaign took the trans issue and made it a centerpiece of their effort. Go back and look at the ads they ran on transgender issues. You talk to people who are involved in the Trump campaign and they will tell you that was a turning point, that running trans ads helped them not just with their base, though certainly it did, but it helped them peel off Black voters, other minority voters, suburban women in some cases, people who traditionally vote Democratic. And so, yes, I think Trump is absolutely a culture warrior. I don't see that stopping. I think that he has found ways to trigger the left, take positions that are not necessarily palatable to the American public from an electoral perspective. And I think he has united conservatives and his supporters behind him. And in some cases, people who weren't necessarily traditional Republican voters. And forgive me, what was the next question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. But the Democrats, I don't think understand this. I think they've decided, they've taken his bait. They've enraged themselves. They've started an internecine fight with each other. And they want to double and triple down on nonsense as opposed to get back to white middle class and lower middle income voters, which was their bread and butter for a century.
Yeah, I think that is something the Democratic Party is very much struggling with right now. And it's hard for them when they don't even have a leader of their party who's determining what their message is. And I'll just say a couple of things about the podcast issue, because it seems to me like podcasts and YouTube and streaming is very much becoming the dominant way of communicating with people. And you know this as a guy who has, you have a couple of very popular podcasts right now. I've seen you on the Spotify top charts. And so, the power of communicating with people through podcasts, through non-traditional ways, in addition to the work that you do on more traditional cable news. And so, you've experienced this personally, I think. But if you look at the top Spotify charts, it's almost entirely dominated by conservatives at this point.
Well, listen, I agree. I mean, I think that that's the weird thing about it. Trump tells you that the left-wing media is controlling things. The other great irony is on migration. If people come across the border, Elon Musk and Donald Trump say, well, they're going to turn the nation blue, but actually those people are traditional Catholics generally,
right?
And they slant towards conservatism. So there's a big irony there. What would turn the country blue, Alex Isenstadt? Having Canada be the 51st state. That would turn the country blue. I mean, they're all liberals up there. I know what Trump's doing,
Yeah. Here's the interesting thing, though, about the podcast issue, which is that, it's not just the Charlie Kirks of the world who are out there who are sort of traditionally aligned with, they're sort of the classic MAGA supporter, right? You also, if you look at the top of the charts, it's also people like Rogan. And those are people who probably are skewing more pro-Trump at this point, but they are appealing to a less traditional MAGA voter. So a lot of men who feel like they are disregarded by society, who are struggling economically, who are maybe struggling emotionally in some cases. And those people have really come to identify with Trump. And Trump did very well among male voters, including male voters who might not typically vote in elections. I mean, look at where Trump spent time. It wasn't just on Rogan. It was on places like 𝗕𝗺, another very popular podcaster. He was hanging out. Trump was literally hanging out at frat houses.
He did well on those podcasts. He did well on 𝗕𝗺's podcast. My kids objectively give him a high grade on that. I guess before I let you go, I want to talk about the shadow effort, which you write about in the book. The GOP is trying to stop Trump. What's the most surprising thing that you learned there? And what do you think of the party formerly known as the GOP? The party's now the MAGA Publicans. Trump decapitated that party, hostile takeover. He owns the party that is now named the Republicans, but it's really the Trumplicans. Talk about the old party of McCain and Romney and Bush and their attempt to try to stop him. And tell me a little bit about them and tell me a little bit about where you think they're going.
You look at what happened in this past election in terms of their efforts to stop Trump, and it felt very much like their efforts in 2015, 2016. And you'll remember that you had donors like Paul Singer and other actually people aligned with the old Romney machine and Mitt Romney himself, who during the 2015, early 2016 part of the Republican Party primary spent millions of dollars in this last-ditch effort to stop Trump from winning the nomination. And it completely failed. It blew up. And it felt like a lot of the same stuff happened in 2023, right? Where Ron DeSantis has this successful 2022 midterm win. And all of a sudden, he is seen as the vessel of the Republican establishment. He's the guy who can finally take out Donald Trump. And so Fox News gets behind DeSantis. The Murdoch machine gets behind DeSantis. And this is actually a sub-theme in the book, which is that for all people talk about Fox News loving Donald Trump, it's actually a marriage of convenience that Murdoch and a lot of the people associated with Fox actually never really liked Trump that much. They saw him as a means of making money and as being good for business. But anyways, they got behind DeSantis. You had other major Republican donors getting behind DeSantis. George W. Bush, of course, no big Trump fan. After DeSantis wins re-election, ends up calling up DeSantis to congratulate him. You had this Republican establishment that was firmly behind Ron DeSantis. And then immediately as DeSantis pokes his head out, begins to engage nationally, things don't turn out well for him. It immediately becomes apparent that he's not ready for the national stage and he's not ready for prime time. Trump at this point is becoming ascendant. He is regaining traction. And once again, this effort to stop Trump just folds. it just kind of collapses upon itself, right? Trump ends up racking up endorsements. DeSantis starts to fade, and it's over.
Yeah, it is objectively the greatest political comeback, I think, in the modern era, if not U.S. history. So we have 5 words that we picked out of your book, and I want you to respond to these, and you can give me a sentence or two, sort of a Rorschach test at the end of our podcast. I say the word Republican. You say what?
It's a party that is now dominated by Donald Trump.
Yes, it's a populist party now. This is a different party than the one that we grew up with. Okay. I say the word Democrat. You say what?
It's a party that is in opposition to Donald Trump, but is very much struggling to find its way right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, I'm paraphrasing. I think Will Rogers once said, I belong to 6 disorganized parties. I'm a Democrat or something like that, right? Okay. So revenge. Title of your book. I say the word revenge. You think of what?
Trump's motivation above all else to get back at the people who he believes are stopping him or have tried to stop him or who were in his way at any time.
Yeah. Also, he needed to avoid jail. He had a pretty big indictment coming on the January 6th stuff. It's interesting. Merrick Garland didn't go after him. It's interesting. But anyway, all right. 2029, 100 years after the stock market crashed, is Donald Trump going to be president on January 20th, 2029?
I don't believe he will be. I think he loves, and we go back to this. This is part of our conversation earlier. He sees it as a means of triggering the left. And when he talks about running for president again in 2028, he sees that as a way of triggering the left and getting the left to talk about things that are not electorally, that are focusing on issues that do not help them electorally. So when he talks about that, he knows it triggers them.
He declares martial law at some point and cancels the election? He Viktor Orbán's the U.S.?
Look, I mean, it's hard for me to predict that. I'll leave that to others to predict.
I'm just throwing it out there so it doesn't. The more you talk about it potentially happening, it'll maybe gird people to make sure it doesn't.
Right.
All right. So 2029, we have a different president.
Okay.
Is that you say that it's January 20th?
I mean, that would be my assumption.
That would be your guess. Okay, I'm going to go with that as well. Okay, I say the word Trump. I say the word Trump.
Sure.
You say what?
Someone who still has widespread power, widespread influence. Consider this for a second. You're someone who's been involved in fundraising for the Republican Party. You've raised a ton of money over the years, right?
30 years. Been involved for 30 years. Yep.
Right. So Trump has in his political operation right now $500 million. We and others have now reported that Elon Musk is prepared to donate another $100 million. In other words, let's just say for the sake of this conversation, Trump has $600 million in his war chest. That is an astonishing amount of money. That is more money potentially than the rest of the Republican Party will raise over the course of this cycle, potentially.
Yeah,
he is going to be able to shape the midterms for years to come. He's going to be able to shape the midterms, and he's potentially going to be able to shape politics for years to come. Not just because of his stature, but because of the money he has.
No question. You are 100% right. Well, my last question, then I'm going to let you go. Is he going to change the name of Washington, D.C. to Trump, D.C.?
Here would be my prediction.
I think the president is George Washington. He told us that in the State of the Union. So is he going to do that?
Okay, so here I'm going to give you a prediction, okay? I think he might float it at one point to once again trigger the left. I don't think he'll actually do it.
Okay, you don't think he's going to be able to do it. All right. But let me say, I think you and I are unanimously, you and I would say he would want to do that. If I said to him tonight, I say, Mr. President, we're going to change Washington, D.C. to Trump, D.C. All we got to do is press a button and everything will change. He would do that, or he'd say, no, I'm a traditionalist. Let's leave it in George Washington's name. What would he say?
I think the former, and he would float it out potentially on Truth Social to make people on the left, to make their heads explode. Okay. Would he actually do it? I'm skeptical.
He would do it. He would do it if he could do it. Come on, Alex. You've been around this thing a long time.
He would do it if he could do it. I agree.
He would do it if he could do it.
He would do it if he could do it.
The title of the book is Revenge, the Inside Story of Trump's Return to Power. It's an amazing book. It's incredibly well-researched, well-sourced. And if you really want to know what happened over the last 18 months in Trump world, read Alex Isenstadt's book, Revenge. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Anthony. Thank you for having me.